Sheep and Goat, Judgement of the Nations, Part 2. The identity of the 51 goat nations. Firstly, Canaan, or the Canaanites. Following on from the previous video, it is my opinion that 51 of the 153 nations are goat nations and will not survive the judgment of the nations. It's interesting to try and identify who these nations are today. Firstly, there are the 12 nations descended from Canaan and his sons. These nations were generally known for their wickedness, although there were good individuals among them. All these nations dwelt in the land of Canaan prior to the arrival of the Israelites, and according to Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 2, 6 of them plus the Perizzite nation were to be utterly destroyed. Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 2. And when the Lord thy God shall deliver them before thee, thou shalt smite them and utterly destroy them. Thou shalt make no covenant with them, nor show mercy unto them. The following chart gives more details of these 12 nations. Canaan and his sons are listed in the table of nations in Genesis chapter 10. Firstly, Canaan. In the Bible, the Canaanites are listed as a separate tribe from the tribes descended from the sons of Canaan. So if you look in Deuteronomy chapter 7 verse 1 and 2, the tribes that have to be thrown out of Canaan are listed. The Canaanite tribe are listed as a separate tribe from the other tribes that have to be cast out. So there's 6 tribes descended from Canaan altogether that have to be cast out. That's the Canaanites themselves, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Girgashites, also called the Girgashites, and the Hivites. Those are the ones that have to be thrown out of Canaan. The other ones are not mentioned as inhabiting Canaan at the time when Joshua invades Canaan. Then we've got the Sidonites. They lived in Sidon, a city in north of Israel. Tyre and Sidon were sister cities, and they were known for their opulence and wickedness. Because Israel failed to overthrow Sidon in their conquest of the Promised Land, their wickedness continued. To a Jewish audience in Jesus' day, Sidon was synonymous with wickedness. Then we have the tribes known as the Hittites, which at one time were thought to be mythical, but now archaeological discoveries have shown that they were a real nation. The Jebusites, the tribe that inhabited what became Jerusalem. The Amorites, they were known for their iniquity. The Girgashites, don't know a lot about them. And the Hivites, who dwelt in the Mount Hermon area. So those 6 nations plus the Perizzites were the ones listed that had to be cast out of Canaan. Then we have the other sons of Canaan, the Archites. It's interesting that Hushai, the Archite, was a friend of David and helped him when he was cast out of Jerusalem by Absalom. We've got the Sinites. The Sinites are interesting because historically they're connected with the Chinese. The Arvadites, they were noted as mariners in Ezekiel chapter 27 verse 8. Zemarites, and then finally we've got the Hamathites. They inhabited the kingdom of Hamath, located in what is now western Syria and northern Lebanon. So those are the Canaanite tribes. So in fact, the Canaanite nations today are the nations surrounding Israel. On a modern map, the nations bordering Israel are Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. We know from scripture that Egypt will survive into the millennial period, Isaiah chapter 19 verse 21, and will accept Jesus as Lord. Jordan is actually part of the land promised to Israel by God, Joshua chapter 1 verse 4. Lebanon is the land with the strongest Canaanite roots. The Canaanites' DNA lives on in Lebanon, where over 90% of Lebanese derive their ancestry from Canaanites, according to a study published in the American Journal of Human Genetics. Only Egypt of these nations can be assured of a future as a nation. As a general rule of thumb, those nations which have committed themselves to Islam will not survive the Matthew 25 judgment, unless at some point, as in the case of Egypt, they turn to Christ. Not all the Canaanite nations remained in Canaan. Genesis chapter 10 verse 18 says that they were spread abroad. The Sinites are an interesting case. Names such as Sinai reflect the names of Sineas or the Sinites. The Chinese are descendants of these original Sinites, and most call themselves Han, from Ham, one of Noah's 3 sons. China in ancient times was called the land of the Sinites. This name is still used, and the Bible even calls this distant land the land of Sinim. Not all the people in China are Sinites though. There are several people groups that made it China. One group, the Maya people, have their ancestry through Noah's son Japheth and his son Gomer. In my opinion, none of the Canaanite nations listed will survive the judgment of the nations, but this does not mean that individuals of Canaanite stock cannot be saved. There are several examples of righteous Canaanites, such as Uriah the Hittite and Hushai the Archite. We also have the example of the Gibeonites, who were a family within the Hivite nation but found a place in Israel. We can see God's grace operating in the Old Testament. The curse on the Canaanites from Noah in Genesis 9:25 was, "And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren." So the curse didn't say all Canaan's offspring were to be destroyed, just that they would be servants to their brethren. However, as a whole, the Canaanite nations always seem to have a tendency towards evil, which is why, in my opinion, they will not survive the judgment of the nations. The Matthew 25 judgment takes into account all the nations that have existed in history, even if they only existed as nation-states at one particular period in history. The next video will look at nations descended from Hagar.